This is my final day playing with aeroplanes, and it's quite a poignant thing for me. It's been a difficult little bit of a transition, but I have given up flying. I've hung up my headsets, and I say goodbye to 35 or so years of flying. I've owned a series of airplanes, and I have a wonderful memories of flying different airplanes. So what this video is about is, if you're interested in my flying career or interested in flying and fly yourself, you will enjoy, I think, some of my anecdotes, some of my war stories, and the reason why I've decided at this age, 65 years old, that I have decided to stop something that I have loved so much. This, of course, is the Pipistrel Sinus motor glider, 15-meter wingspan, has an 80 horsepower Rotax engine in it, and it is sold. I purchased this aeroplane in about 2021, 22. It was during COVID. It was owned by a chap in Ireland. I purchased it from him blind. Well, I had somebody inspect it there, but blind. It came over. I got lucky. The airplane was in wonderful condition, and I went about the idea that I should restart what I had left in South Africa in 2013. But I was not successful. I can fly this plane. I have flown this plane. I decided quite early on that doing content with an aeroplane was not a great idea, because other YouTubers who have done that, basically what you do is you put a target on your back with CASA. CASA is basically Civil Aviation Safety Authority. In South Africa, it was CAA, Civil Aviation Authority. But we used to call it in South Africa the Committee Against Aviation, because everything they seemed to do was to try and stop people flying. And in Australia, it's very, very similar. CASA's whole thing is, well, if we can stop people flying, we can keep aviation safe. That is how it appears. And with CASA, they said to me, Andrew, you cannot have your South African pilot's license. It's not valid. My argument to them is, it is valid, it's just not current. They said it has to be current. It does not, if you read the laws, have to be current. It has to be active. It was active. In fact, it's still active, even now. What do you do to fight them? So they said to me, well, you can go and get a recreational pilot's license, which I did. I went, and then after doing all my flight tests with general aircraft, VOH registered aircraft, I'm very pleased to say that after a couple of weeks of training here down at the Bunbury Aero Club, I have passed all my flight tests. I flew this guy, which is Cessna 152, for my PPL. I then, okay, well, that was a bit of a waste. I then climbed into a number of different airplanes that are RAAus registered, the Recreational Aviation Australia, which is an organization, it's a private organization, not governmental, and it is an organization created so that CASA wouldn't have to handle this type of aviation. It was basically, we're too lazy, we'll give it to somebody else. Now, thank goodness for the RAAs, because they do facilitate, they do help people, and my hat's off to them. They helped me get this aeroplane registered. CASA said, forget it, go to RAAs, even though this aircraft identical, built in the same year, in the same factory, etc., are registered General Aviation VOH. This one, no. Good, like they did with my license. RAOs, just piss off. We're not interested in helping you. So I had to overcome that. So now, for me to, and why then, you might ask, is RAOs, the license, RAOs license, I mean, I am legally allowed to fly certain airplanes in Australia, but here's the issue, and this has made a huge difference for me. This is a motor glider. I've owned 3 of them. I've got 500 or so hours in motor gliders. My previous 2 were tailwheel aircraft, so I had the tailwheel endorsement. I had a variable pitch and propeller endorsement. I had in-flight variable pitch and ground variable pitch on my endorsement, and I had a motor glider endorsement, which means I was legally allowed to shut the engine down and operate it as a motor glider. That's what motor gliders are for. That's what they're about. This amazing little aeroplane can travel 1,000 kilometers on its tank of fuel, but you can also shut it down, and if the winds are favorable, my longest single flight, I did a 500 kilometer triangle in a pure glider. So I could do 500 kilometers. My longest ever flight engine out with a motor glider was 380 kilometers. And so the point is that is the exhilaration, that is the excitement, and that is illegal in Australia on an RAOs license. So I would have to break the law, shut the engine down, and not say anything. So what is that going to do with, I mean, forget about video content. Just forget about it, okay? So that was a discouragement. The other idea was that I like, and I have flown tailwheel airplanes, high wing, low wing, different type, even constant speed propellers. I've done some very basic aerobatic training. I used to do I used to do a loop, and but a chandelle were probably the two most common. I love to do a chandelle. Basically, chandelle is like you get lots of airspeed and you pull the aircraft up, and as it comes vertical, you kick the rudder over all the way until the airplane is sitting like this. Then I pull full air brake to stop the acceleration, because these aircraft are very slippery, very, very aerodynamic, what makes them so efficient. And I would come out, and they were rated to full air brake at V&E. This one isn't, but the other 2 were rated to full air brakes at V&E. V&E is velocity never exceeded. You never exceed that velocity, because go much beyond that and the aircraft will fall apart in the air. So speed is really, really important to maintain within those lines on the airspeed indicator. You have the green lines, you have the yellow lines, turbulent air line, etc., and never go into the red line. And I used to do that. I used to take my kids up in my Zimongo, which was the second motor glider that I owned, and I would take them up and do always just a chandelle, just a beautiful chandelle where they feel weightless just for an instant. Just for an instant they feel weightless as the aircraft is turning in the air, and then they're back to positive G. The aircraft was not rated very highly for negative G, so you never want to go into negative G. Always stay positive G. But at that moment, you kick it over just for a moment, and then you start pulling Gs, and then you would come out, and I would try and limit it to 3G, a 3G pull out, and my kids would scream in the cockpit next to me, and they loved it. They loved it. With that particular airplane, which are the greatest memories I have of flying, is that airplane. My kids they hadn't left home, but certainly they were old enough to come flying with me, and particularly Kate used to love flying with me, and she often took the controls and was remarkable.
There we go.
At the controls of the airplane, and we did a bit of cross-country flying together. I did an episode of my TV show which was called Take a Deep Breath, and we did, I'll show you a short portion of that episode now. This is my other passion. No, not the Coke, the plane. Nothing quite prepares you for the thrill of soaring in a glider. I've been soaring now for about 22 years in proper gliders and aircraft like this one, which is better known as a motor glider. Today my co-pilot is my 11-year-old daughter, Kate. Kate is already passionate about flying, even though she can't quite reach the rudder pedals yet. Kate will also operate the camera for this flight. The aircraft is powered by a 100 horsepower 4-cylinder horizontally opposed engine built in Austria by Rotax. And the wonderful part about that particular flying episode in my life was that I lived 20 minutes away from the airfield at the Stellenbosch Flying Club, and it was a lovely social environment. And let me show you the place I'm with. So another one of the disappointments I have, because of course I suppose I was trying to recreate that. The Havilland tiger moth. Of all the things in South Africa I miss the most, it is my old flying club. This is Stellenbosch Flying Club. The only other airfield, Perth, is basically south of the city, called Jandakot. It is a very, very busy hub. I did some of my training and landed there a few times, because you need that as part of needed that as part of my navigation RA Oz endorsement. I needed to land at a controlled airfield, which I did, and I didn't find it too difficult. Obviously, the instructor briefed me, so it was pretty straightforward. But I tried to create what I had in Stellenbosch, that lovely social environment, and as you can see, I didn't succeed. So this here is my flying club as it is now, and it is a public holiday Monday. And, well, what do you reckon? Absolutely nothing. There's nothing, there's nobody here. There was a Cessna 172 doing bumps and go, a bit of training, and that's it. No social anything. So that wasn't going to work. And here in Northam, it's a 2.5 hour drive, whereas before it was 20 minutes drive. But I understood that. So putting my aircraft in Jandakot was not an option. Hangaraging is extremely expensive, and there are landing fees and things like that. That's not the kind of flying that I like doing. Club flying, small group, small airfield, bit of open airspace around, which is not the case there, and it's just not the kind of flying that I like doing. And that is social club flying, which is not possible. I love playing with aeroplanes. You must understand that it's not unlike overlanding, in that half of what overlanding is the going out on amazing trips, but the other half is tinkering and playing with one's machines. And it is exactly the same with airplanes. I love tinkering and playing, but it's not rewarded by the overland experience. It's not rewarded by the flying. I do not enjoy cross-country flying. I find it dull and boring. What I enjoy flying is in situations where there is a challenge. There must be a challenge to me as a pilot. And I'm not talking about flying in really bad weather or anything stupid like that. I'm talking about a challenge. Taking an aircraft off, flying it around a bit, and landing it is not a challenge. I can do it. And I do it reasonably well. My flying skills are probably could probably be safely described as average. And those of you flying might say, well, surely you want to get better at it. Yes, but why? Why be better at it? I want to share with you now some of my experiences of some war stories about why those moments, those aviation moments that have thrilled me, and even now as I recall them, I'm excited by them. Right, I'm going to think of three. I'm going to give you three. I learned how to fly at the Magaliesberg Gliding Club. It was about a 50-minute drive from my hometown when I lived in Johannesburg before I met Gwyn. In fact, I met Gwyn while still very active in that club. And one of the first things I did, I said to her, would you like to come flying with me? And she said, yeah, I'd love to. And at that moment, I hadn't actually gone solo yet. I was about to go solo, and then we met up, and then she actually witnessed my very, very first solo flight, and everything that happened afterwards. When you go solo, they don't do it anymore. You have to buy everybody beers, and then you bend you over a chair, and then all of the qualified pilots come and slap your bum, because the point is that, and part of this is true, you actually only learn how to fly once you're actually flying. Yes, it's a steep learning curve while you're doing it with an instructor, and it's a massive learning curve once you start doing it on your own and are pilot in command of an airplane. And now the whole point of that is that you'll become a good pilot if you can feel your aircraft through the seat of your pants, and the idea is that everybody would then slap your bum to soften your bum up so you could feel more through the seat of your pants. And they beat the little living crap out of me. Actually, some of those pilots were actually quite vicious, but they did get me to, kind of made up for it, to put my head in Gwyn's lap while they did this. I understand it was the last time that actually happened, because somebody actually called them out and said, no, that's actually getting barbaric, because some of the pilots were really mean. But I then went on to have a fantastic career in flying gliders, and one of the things we used to do, and I still regard it as one of the most thrilling things I have ever done in my life, we would fly and normally take off at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon when the fair weather cumulus clouds were starting to build. These are very cloudy, mashed potato type clouds with flat bottoms, and often the bottom is flat and it's grey underneath. And what happens with these clouds, these are actually storm clouds forming, and then they break down, and then another one forms, and then another one breaks down. And if two really close to each other get close to each other, then they form, and they get even bigger and even taller, and then sometimes they'll collapse until often, they will combine themselves into a huge cumulonimbus cloud, full of rain, full of incredibly high winds, the kind of thing that if you fly into, you don't generally survive it. But we would fly intentionally underneath, not a cumulonimbus, but a fair weather cumulus as they were growing, and some quite big ones. We would fly underneath. Now, when you're flying underneath cloud, see, normal aviation, okay, RARs, I remembered before, you can't fly close to clouds. You're not allowed to. Why? I must just fly around. I love cloud dancing. So fair weather clouds, and you go in and around the cloud. I've got footage of my plane around these clouds with the engine off and trying to find some lift, and then getting some lift, and then getting some sink, and then exploring like a sailing boat where you're working the machine to get the most out of the wind, to point it in the right and get the most speed out of the environment. Gliding is very similar. You're very much part of this machine, but part of the environment as well. Flying an aircraft with an engine, you are far less part of the environment because you've got this machine pulling you along. So the beautiful thing about gliding is that you are close. I got less than one wingspan away from vultures, flying next to vultures in my glider. One moment I remember so clearly, I could see the leading edge of the wing of the vulture ruffling in the air going over this vulture, this huge vulture, which probably had a wingspan of 8 meters, maybe a little less, but enormous animal, beautiful thing. And I remember once he turned his head around, so his wings were out like this, and he turned his head around and saw me. And he just literally removed his starboard wing and went down. It was exhilarating. It was like, wow, amazing. Back to the cumulus clouds, we would fly underneath them and we would go looking for the flattest bottomed, tallest cloud, and we would fly underneath it. And when you're flying and you've got underneath the cloud, when the cloud reaches the horizon, when they meet, you will go blind, i.e., you will be in the cloud. The last thing you do is fly in a cloud. I do not have none of the gliders in those days. This would have been 1986, 7, 8, and 9, that period. No instrumentation giving me a artificial horizon. None. Okay. And so I was taught, you fly into cloud, you will perish. You've got about 40 seconds before you go into what's known as a graveyard spin. You will not know if you are upside down, the right way up. You will not know. Your senses are incapable of sensing that. Don't fly into clouds. Don't. Okay. But now we were flying really close to clouds. And what we would do is we would push the nose down, push the nose down, push the nose down, because we've got this lift, massive energy lift. Our vario, we had audible varios that go beep, 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 beep when we were going up and go beep when we're going down. But these vario would be off the charts. Beep! And the vario is just giving me maximum up, and I'm turning that energy into speed. But there's a limit. I can only go, in that airplane, it was 220 kilometers an hour. That was V&E. I could go to 220 kilometers an hour. Not over. And so you've got these dive brakes, which you can pull. This aircraft has got dive brakes as well. You pull the big slats that come out of the wings. And you could, if you found yourself, oops, you could arrest the going up bit. But what we would do is we would time it, and just before the edge of the cloud, we could see the edge of the cloud coming towards us. We're doing 200 plus kilometers an hour, and we are right below this grey ceiling. We'll pull up, key the microphone, and scream. And every now and again, you'd hear somebody going, yee-haw! And this is what they were doing. And then, poof! You were blind for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, just, and you would then continue going up because you've got all of this energy which you're now turning into height, and you would go straight up and gently turn and be flying next to this enormous wall of white cloud, and you would come up. Now it's very, very quiet, because when the aircraft gliders are not silent, you hear a lot of air. It's air noise. But when you're flying a glider at minimum speeds, it's just a hiss. It's very, very quiet. And then you would kind of, and you'd look around. Do it again, and just turn the aircraft over and let it fall. Very, very gently. Make sure that you're not getting over V&E, and then go down underneath the cloud. Use a little bit of air brake, get your speed back, little bit of air brake, put the air brakes away, climb underneath the cloud, then beep, 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 and then turn. Now these thermals were so strong that you'd be sitting in the cockpit and the thermal is trying to push you out, but you are actually pulling the stick back at an angle of bank, 30, 40 degree angle of bank, trying to stay in this rising column of air, which is trying to throw you out with a centrifugal force. and you would have to counteract it by pulling G-force. So it was not infrequent in those kind of situations. You'd be sitting at 2 Gs in this turn, trying to keep, and eventually you'd realize time to go and level out, speed, and same thing again. And scream your head off. That's what we used to do. Probably the most thrilling thing I've ever done in my life. And I get goosebumps even talking about it now. It was an amazing, amazing experience. And there were 2 times where when I was, I've told this story on actually I'll link it above. I was told the story when I was actually caught in a storm. I was only doing this, what I just described to you, a year or 2 years after going solo, because I now had this experience. I was learning this experience, and we would go out and do that with this experience. The storm that I got caught in that story, I was totally inexperienced, and I was lucky to walk away with my life because of my lack of experience. And I didn't know what I was walking into. So, but I got through that, and now with these kind of chasing storms, we knew, was it risky? Some of you might say that was stupidly risky. No, you don't understand gliding. So if you're saying to me that's stupidly risky, you are saying that from a point of view of ignorance. All right, you're ignorant. All right. Was it risky? Yes. Was it more risky than, say, riding a motorbike? No. Well, let's put it this way. If you were riding a motorcycle, and you have very, very little experience, and you are going fast, and you're challenging yourself and pushing yourself to the limit, well, that's more risky than doing what we were doing in a glider. So risk is all relevant. At the time, it wasn't risky, and we had some incredible experiences. Yes, it was more risky than walking down the street and buying a packet of chips at the shop. Yes, it was more risky than that. Okay. But in terms of what we were doing and what our experience, not particularly risky. And I want to tell you about the time that I realized that I knew how to fly an aeroplane. And it was a cathartic event. And I suddenly realized this truth. I had about 160 hours of gliding in my logbook, and I had about 150 to 200 hours of power flying in my logbook, and I was flying my Grob 109B, a 18.4 meter wingspan motor glider. The same aircraft was used by the Royal Air Force cadets as their foundation training aircraft, and it was beautifully made German aircraft. And it was, being a motor glider, it meant that I could shut it down, and I did a lot of amazing gliding flights in that airplane. I did several long-distance flights in that aircraft with Gwyn. We even flew, longest was to Botswana from South Africa, and we flew over the Okavango, over the Makadikadi salt pans, and we had an adventure, and I photographed it and used some of the pictures in my travel book, even though it wasn't about flying. I was coming home, and I had touched down. I'd had a lovely 2.5, 3 hour gliding flight, and it was at my home airfield, and this is when I was still living in South Africa. I was married to Gwyn, and we had had our first child, Stephanie, and I was loving my flying. And I came back and did a nice touchdown. Quite a demanding airplane. The motor gliders with tail wheels are quite demanding in that they are. You've got this very, very large and heavy wing. So once it starts moving, you have to be very quick on the control. All tail draggers have their challenges, but this is the one thing. Taxiing them is difficult, and it was a challenging airplane to fly. And I felt like I got quite good with it. I was very comfortable with it. You must understand, for the first probably 100 hours in that airplane, I would have butterflies every time I climbed into the cockpit. And I considered that quite healthy, because focus, concentrate. You cannot mess this up. You don't just want to do it, you want to do it well. And after 150, maybe a little less, maybe 100 hours or so in that aeroplane, I was very confident. I had landed this day, and I was taxiing back to my hangar, and the tower said, Uniform Zulu Tango, we have an aircraft in the pattern with an unsafe nose hook. Is there any chance you could do a visual inspection? I thought, yeah, I've got enough fuel. Yes. And they gave me clearance, and I quickly taxied back up to the holding point, quickly, took off, and it was magical because as I was about to push power, I looked and I could see the spec, and I seem to remember it was a Cherokee, 6-seater Cherokee with a retractable gear. I seem to remember that, but I'm not 100% sure, but it was definitely a low wing, single engine. And I saw the spot, and it was coming down almost like downwind. And I thought, all right, I'm gonna meet you there. And I picked a spot in space. I got to fly to there. Because by that time, and he was 500 feet above circuit height. So he was 1,500 feet above ground. And I figured I'll push full power, came off the ground, and this would have been illegal in Australia because you're not allowed to turn the aircraft to anything underneath 500 feet in Australia. I pushed power once I was 50 feet off the ground. I put it into it was probably a 25-degree angle, full power climbing turn. And I remember the tower was right here, and I waved to them. And I got right underneath it. I needed to make no corrections at all. I came up underneath it and said to the pilot, hold your position. I told him where I was. He said, I have you in sight. I said, pitch your aircraft down and up. And I reported to him that his nose wheel appears good. It is not moving back and forward, and it appears to me as if it is locked fully forward. I'm going to just show you this airplane as it comes by. There are 2 aircraft in this circuit. I think this is the most traffic I've ever seen at this airfield at any one time. No, actually, I'm exaggerating. There are 2. If another one comes, that'll be the busiest I've ever seen this airfield. Anyway, I said, I believe your wheel is good. The Cherokee then asked for permission to land, which he was granted. I keyed my mic and I called the tower and said, I am a little concerned in that if I'm wrong and something goes wrong, I'm not going to be able to land. And I'm a little low on fuel. I'm okay, but I'd like to land if I could, please. The truth is that actually I had plenty of fuel, but I did have so they said, he said, can you expedite your landing from your current position? I was high, close to the airfield, probably not more than a mile or so away from the airfield. Normally, what that Cherokee would do now is extend, descend, extend, turn, and come in. And I turned the airplane over. I pulled full air brakes, put the nose into a nose dive like this. Not inverted. I wasn't inverted, but I was pretty close to up. I needed to lose a lot of height really fast without gaining a lot of airspeed. So full brakes, and I came out on a short final approach, leveled out, got my speed right, eased the brakes all the way back, power off, and controlled my descent, and did a very, very nice 3-point landing, boom, like this. And I turned in and parked my plane. And as I did that, I got out of the plane and I stepped and I looked at it and I said to myself, you know how to fly an airplane. You can fly an aircraft. And the reason why I did that is I realized that I hadn't flown the airplane, I had fulfilled and completed a mission. Everything that I had been doing was completely natural. I just did it. And that was the day I learned how to fly a plane. One more story before I wrap up. My previous aircraft was the Zimongo, you've seen that. And it was very like the Grob 109, but even higher performance. It also had an 18.4 meter wingspan. And I lived near an area of mountains. And that was magnificent because I would go ridge soaring. So if there was a westerly blowing, it would blow over the Table Mountain and then hit my mountains near where I lived called the Helderberg. And you got this wave. And you would fly in this wave on the upward. And it was so exhilarating. I would take everything out of the airplane, everything. Not more than 1/3 fuel. I didn't need more. All I need, keep the airplane light. And I would fly in these wave conditions. I would strap myself down really, really tight. And I would fly over and ridge soar over these mountains. And sometimes it got incredibly turbulent. So much so that I would actually scream because the airplane would stall. I'd be flying and suddenly one of the wings would stall because it was so turbulent. But I had lots of height. I mean, flying safely. I had a big, and again, you might be thinking, that's risky. No, I was learning how to fly. You can't learn how to sail if you only sail in really light winds. You can't learn how to do anything unless you push your ability. And I was learning this aeroplane, and it paid off. It paid off. It saved my life, and it saved Gwyn's life too. I would go and do this kind of flying whenever possible, and the conditions were such as this 5 or 6, 7, 10 times a year. And I would fly almost every week, so I was good with the plane. I was very comfortable with the airplane. It wouldn't surprise me anymore. Again, I had about 200 hours on that airplane, so I was comfortable with it. It was the very last weekend before I sold the aircraft. I sold it just before I left South Africa. And I took Gwyn up, I took Stephanie up, Kate up, Erin up. We had this magnificent day at the Flying Club. It was absolutely lovely. But Gwyn's flight was interesting. We had gone out to Hermanus, which was, I suppose, 30 minutes flying time from where I was over a ridge of hills. And then we watched the southern right whales and their calves that were playing just off the sea. And we would fly and at about 100 feet and just watch them. It was phenomenal. It was just so thrilling. And I always fly it with, Gwyn would always be sitting on this side of me, so I'd fly it with her wing down, and it was brilliant. And we must have spent an hour just watching the whales. So decided, okay, had enough. Yeah. Okay, let's head back. Headed back. There was a ridge of hills that I'd flown over 100 times. With the southeasterly, which is the prevailing summer winds in Cape Town, the air would go over these mountains and cause what's known as rotor. And the air, basically, you have a massive low pressure area over the lee side of the hill. And it's almost vertical. The hill, the altitude of those hills, if I remember correctly, was just under 3,000, about 2,800 feet or so. And they're really close to the sea, so it's vertical. I seem to remember it's 2,800 feet. But anyway, I remember that I could not legally fly more than 4,000 feet in that airspace. Okay, so I knew there was a wind behind me, and I knew that there would probably be rotor and it would be bumpy. I'd done it 100 times. I knew the conditions. Gwyn in the aircraft, and I pulled the speed back to I know, a little bit higher than, obviously higher than stall speed. A comfortable speed in lumpy weather, so you've got a margin for error, and climbed out 4,000, high as I could go. And we came over nice and smooth, and then the next thing, in an instant, the right wing stalled and dropped. It literally did this. That's how fast it did it. So she kind of yelled, held on. I immediately, with that aeroplane, it was full forward stick, and obviously those of you who know, opposite rudder to the turn. So immediate, as it did this, full left rudder, and full forward center stick. And it's very important to keep the stick in the middle, not too middle. Full rudder, okay. And now the aircraft is turning towards this ridge of hills. Now, I'd learnt during my mountain flying training, you never steer towards the mountain. You always steer away from it. So if you're ridge soaring and you've got hills here, you fly like this, and then you'll move towards the hill, and then you'll turn away and turn away. Always turn away from them. Never turn toward. The turn was starting towards the hill, and I was uncomfortably close. Would we have hit it? I don't think so, but we might have. It was certainly touch and go. Because I had done it so often, because this maneuver was, I didn't freak out, I just went whack. And I said, I've got it, I've got it, I've got it, I've got it. What was actually happening was I didn't have it, but I hadn't lost it. Okay, I didn't have it, but I hadn't lost it. I'd not lost control of the airplane. And I pushed, and eventually, and we recovered 400 feet above the ground. That's how much we lost. Lost about 2,000 feet in that. And this was this invisible air coming down like this. But because I had flown in this manner, if the wind was a bit as long as it was in the parameters of the instruction pilot's operating manual, I would fly if I thought it was safe. I've never been okay, it's not very good, I won't fly today. No, fly. That's the time to fly. That is the time to fly, so you can become good. So then that era of my aviation stopped and restarted again with this. But it never gained traction. The process of getting it here from Ireland was difficult. The bureaucratic headaches, mountains that I had to climb here in Australia were incredibly painful. Then when I flew it, with all of the restrictions that I told you about, I flew it successfully. I was absolutely fine with it. By the time my third or fourth landing, I was good. It was good. See, it's a very easy airplane to fly. By far the easiest airplane I've ever owned to fly. Mainly because it is a tricycle gear. They're easier to fly than a tailwheel airplane. But as a platform, the Sinus is a lovely little plane. I went and did my flight test. I was on my own in the aircraft, and I thought, okay, well, you're now going to go through the various processes. I was fully qualified in this type of aircraft, this weight, etc., in Australia before I did so, in case you're wondering. And so I then did a stall, and then power on stall, power off stall, steeper, come on. And then it is so well behaved that it would sit in a stall and just sort of wallow like this, losing altitude, And I would say, okay, well, let's try and actually now, strictly not actually allowed. Okay, I want to get you into an incipient spin. Now, is incipient aerobatics? There is a sign in here saying no aerobatics. I push the rudder and it kind of starts to go. It's a tiny bit of left rudder, straight again. Try it on the other side, same thing. It's so well mannered. It is so easy to fly. So now I've got an airplane that is so easy to fly, so well mannered, a lovely little plane, but what am I going to do with it? If I'm not allowed to glide with it, content is out of the question, so I can no longer really put it on the business. I have put this on the business because I have done some flying content, but I can't realistically do it anymore because I'm not going to do flying content, which means I can't legitimately put it on the business anymore. The costs of the aircraft and its running and maintenance, which is not cheap, even for a simple airplane like this. And I thought, well, if I don't like cross-country flying, I cannot do aerobatics, I cannot, maybe sell it and get a different aircraft. That's why I showed you that RV-8. They're the most amazing little sports aircraft. Amazing. I could probably afford to buy one. Selling this and buy one, I could probably afford to buy one, but to fly it, I have to have a private pilot's license. And to have a private pilot's license in Australia, I would have to start from scratch. And I thought, do you really want to do that, given that the environment out here in Northam is not a social environment, it's not what you used to have. Recreating what you used to have is not going to happen no matter what airplane you fly and you have. What would I then do with it? Well, then I would probably do some aerobatics. I would learn some aerobatics because I do thoroughly enjoy aerobatics. Very limited in motor gliders because of such long wings. You can't do an aileron roll or anything like that. You can't do that because the aircraft's not designed for it. And so you are very limited. But a few aerobatics that I could do in my previous airplanes, I did and loved it. Not allowed to do any of those things in this, okay? Against the rules. I would not be allowed to go over 10,000 feet, RAR's license rules. Not allowed to go over 10,000 feet. In gliding weather, 10,000 feet is, you frequently strap on a bit of oxygen. My highest was 16,500 feet in a glider. That was interesting. That was exciting. That was pushing the boundaries. RAR's is basically saying the boundaries are here, and you may not fly out of those boundaries. You're not even allowed to turn the aircraft lower than 500 feet. Really? So my frustration is kind of, well, it would be cheap, it would be easier for me to go back to South Africa, and I could probably do it in a couple of weeks, just regain my private pilot's license in South Africa. But here's what stopped me doing that. I could quite easily come back to Australia with that, and they come up with another reason, another invention of why, no, you can't have your Australian PPL. Because, let's face it, I have a South African private pilot's license, and they wouldn't let me fly. There's no reason to believe that getting it again would change their minds. Why? Because it's current and not active. They could turn around and say, yeah, but it's only current in South Africa. I know. That was the thing. So that was, you could spend all that time and money and get absolutely nowhere. And then I decided, time to hang up. Time to hang up your boots. Time to go and do something else. What? I don't know what. Maybe I'll buy a sailing boat. I don't know. But the point is that I've reconciled this with myself, and you will know, any of you know, that if you've had something that you've been wildly passionate about for years and years and years, I'm talking about 3.5 decades, passionate about flying, and not having the financial resources to do quite what you've loved to do, but you have done some amazing things, given that you've moved country twice, and brought up 3 lovely people.
I just ran.
And I'm still married to the same girl. I don't think I'm short on success in that regard. But this airplane does not promise me what I wanted to get out of flying in Australia. I have flown in this country, I have done that part, but now The journey has come to an end. I hope you've enjoyed my stories, and thank you so much for watching. Till next time.